As a creative, we often do the things that we love. But what happens when the things that you love is not loving you back and it is creating more harm than good? If you have been experiencing creative burnout, then this is going to be the best series for you. Welcome to the She Said Girl podcast, where we help women recover from chronic burnout. If you're new, I'm your host, Lindsay Christian, holistic hormone coach and burnout recovery guide. Today, we have a really powerful series that we're kicking off, which is going to be all on creative burnout all month long of November or whenever you tune in. But today, we're going to dive in and really talk deeper about what is creative burnout and how does it happen? And also, what happens to our brains when we are creatively burned out? Like, what's actually happening behind the scenes? It's going to blow your mind once you understand what's really happening, because it will solve so many answers for you. So let's dive in and talk about what it means to be creative. So when I say creative, I'm not just talking about artists. Creative energy is truly an act of bringing the unseen into form. It's that same energy that grows a seed into a plant or a tree. It's the same energy that creates families or even solve problems. That energy is truly divine energy. And it is that spiritual spark that is designed within every human being. If you look around wherever you are right now, there is not one thing that has not been created from first a thought from another human being, all the way down to the tiniest of screws that are holding every little piece of everything together. But somewhere along the way, especially if you identify with being a creativity is starting to feel like maybe productivity. So we start to measure our imagination by our output, by the likes that we have, by the deadlines, by how many sales we make, by the deliverables that we can produce. And that's where the burnout starts. So when we focus on creating for ourselves versus creating for others, that's where we get a big distinction. So for myself, I'm a big creator, right? And I love creating when I can just allow myself to just let loose, just be whatever comes out, and I can look back at it and see it being reflected back towards me. It's very much a beautiful relationship between the creator and the creation. But when it comes to creating for others, let's be honest, most of us do create for others, whether we're creating for clients or employers or followers, or maybe even if it's just for validation. So for freelance creators, that might look like pouring your heart and soul into someone else's vision. For corporate creatives, it's that originality that you have that gets boxed in by brand guidelines and approval layers. And so while you're still technically in the energy of creating, the joy of the creative process is being outsourced. So we lose that joy, we lose that spark, that flame, the soul of our creative energy. And it's almost as if the hands that are creating are now tied to strings like a puppet, like there's someone else mastering you. And that part feels really uncomfortable. You know, there's a big difference between creative burnout and just like working too hard. So let's say if you work a job, but it's not a creative job, you still can maintain your creativity. Because a lot of times when you do have a creative job and you are overworking in that creative space, you just don't have the energy left to create something that's for yourself. There's so many demands that come with working a creative job. For myself personally, I think the biggest and saddest part to it is that when you start creating for your work, it literally changes the way that you create. It alters your creative process because you become conditioned to create under pressure. I worked in the corporate space as a creative, as a video producer for about 7 years. And in those 7 years, my creative process became very reactive. It became, okay, we need this now. We need to put this out here. And then when we move into a space of creating for an audience, like on YouTube or whatever, that's where I run into the challenge of the metrics training me as well. Because it's like, oh, well, if people aren't watching long enough, they're not going to push it. And so it's like the work that you do starts to become pointless. Because if you're designing and you're creating for something for other people to see, it's no longer going to be seen because it didn't meet a certain metric. So slowly but surely, you just start to become trained in what you're doing as far as creating. And you start losing that time of what you normally would do to create for yourself. And a lot of times I would struggle because I'm like, man, I can't turn it off. Like the way that I would create any content to be seen, it would be really hard for me to just relax and let go and just create just with full authenticity. And that conditioning trains your brain to associate creativity with survival because it is literally your means to survive. It is tied to how much money you make to be able to sustain your life. So it literally rewires your dopamine and your stress hormones and your imagination centers. And the only way to really get that back is to start slowing down your nervous system and retraining that dopamine with sacred forms of pleasure that is intentional, to give your mind that space to wander again so you can have that creative spark return. So that's a big part of what we do in my community, the Pleasure Wire, to help you be able to reactivate that natural flow and that creativity by helping your body recover from burnout. So if you are looking for that, definitely click the link down below. So it's kind of sad because something that is so beautiful, something that is so powerful as a gift to you, starts to just become the thing that controls you. And then we see the creatives that create it for themselves, and they can maintain their authenticity because they never really worked in another space, And so it's kind of like you can have a little creative envy where you're seeing people just be in their own space of creating however they want to create, and they maintain that, and you look at that and it's like, oh man, they're getting praised for it, but I'm like kind of locked into this paralysis of creation for what I've done for other people. So let's talk a little bit more about the anatomy, the deeper roots of creative burnout. Creative burnout is not just tiredness. It's when the very thing that once gave you your spark, your energy, your light starts taking that away. And it happens slowly. And maybe you push through one more deadline, or you say yes to one more project, or you create another thing on command. At first, you're proud of how productive you are and the things that you've created. Then you open your laptop or your sketchpad and you just start to feel nothing. No inspiration, no curiosity. You just kind of feel blank. And a lot of times we think, oh, I got creative block. Or maybe I'm just a little lazy right now. I'm just like not motivated. I want to get back to who I was with my creativity. And the truth is that that's actually a form of depletion. So while traditional burnout comes from overworking the body and the mind, your creative energy is a part of your soul. It's your essence. It's your je ne sais quoi. The part about you that no one can touch but can feel. Creative burnout comes from overusing that energy of your soul. And it's when your inner world has given so much more than it's received. And in this world of algorithms and, brand guidelines and content quotas, creative burnout is almost inevitable, right? Because creation has now become on demand. And we've turned something that is truly organic, that flows, that is meant to inspire us, into something that's very transactional. And I think that's the saddest part, to be honest. So if you've been following me for a while, you know I love to dive into the science of things and how burnout impacts our brain and our hormones and all that good stuff. So let's talk a little bit more deeply about our brain in creative burnout. When we talk about creative burnout, we're really describing a nervous system and brain that's in survival mode under the disguise of creativity. So creativity and imagination and intuition all require for your brain to feel safe enough to wander, to flow, to imagine. But when you're under constant stress from the deadlines and the performance pressure and the overstimulation and the desire for the validation and the likes and the follows, and then what comes with that, with all the rejection as well, your brain will shift out of creation and into protection. So first, let's talk about the imagination center of the brain, which is going to be your prefrontal cortex. It's going to be responsible for the daydreaming, for imagination, for emotional expression, and for getting that vision. When you are in a relaxed state, this part of your brain lights up. So this starts to connect to abstract thoughts and emotions to form new ideas. But when you're burned out or you're under chronic stress, cortisol starts to flood the brain and it actually will reduce activity in the prefrontal cortex. So this is why when you're burned out, you can start to feel really foggy or uninspired or even disconnected from your creative intuition. So you literally cannot access the part of your brain that makes those new ideas because there's an override of the stress part of your brain. When you're burned out, it's not that your creativity disappears, which is how we feel, right? But it's the doorway to that imagination that temporarily shuts down to keep us in the space of survival. So we literally cannot be in a space of imagination and danger at the same time. And this makes sense why if you're feeling burned out, it's so hard to manifest, which is all about creating your reality. Oh my gosh. Just me saying this out loud kind of made that click in my mind. We have to do an episode on that. We absolutely have to do an episode on that. That is going to be really powerful, and we'll do that in this series because I want to talk about that. Now let's talk about the next part to your brain. You have what's called the default mode network, which is like the daydream network, okay? And we're going to call this DMN. This is a web of your brain's regions that activate when you're not focused on a specific task, like when you're daydreaming or you're walking or you're showering. And so this network helps you to form creative connections between unrelated ideas and then those classic aha moments, like what I just experienced with you. But when you're constantly multitasking or if you're under a lot of overstimulation and productivity, that will always override this network. So if you never give your mind a chance to wander and to just relax and to think and imagine things, your brain literally forgets how to imagine. So our most creative ideas don't come from effort, they create from stillness. But when you're burned out, this robs us of that mental space. And so we start scrolling instead of dreaming. So diving into the limbic system, we have our amygdala, which is kind of like our little alert center in our brain, and the hippocampus. And these hold that emotional memory. When you have those emotions, that's what's really giving you meaning to your creative experiences. Oftentimes we're creating out of a feeling and emotion that we have, right? And so when we're burned out, this system actually gets dysregulated. That amygdala stays in overdrive, scanning for threats, scanning for, oh no, did someone like what I just posted? Did someone hate it? Did someone unfollow? Did someone unsubscribe? Right? A lot of times we hear like, oh, it's a threat or it's a fear, and our brain always goes to something that's super scary. But we are sending those fear messages to ourselves all the time, constantly, when we're worried about something, when we're worried about how we're going to be perceived, how is my content going to be rejected, or is my content going to convert someone over to purchasing something because I have to literally survive, right? So content creation, man, I can't wait to dive into that episode because it has just done a lot of great things for a lot of people, but man, it has done a lot of harm. So your amygdala stays in overdrive, but then the other big piece is that hippocampus struggles with focus and memory. So as a result, even when you're trying to create, it can feel emotionally heavy or just pointless. Like, why am I doing this? Like, this means nothing to me. So now let's move into the dopamine system. Many of us have heard of dopamine, which we think of it as kind of like the reward system. But dopamine is the neurochemical of anticipation and motivation and curiosity. It's kind of that hormone that drives you a little closer to something that might open a new door for you. All of that is essential to creativity. But in creative burnout, your dopamine receptors actually become desensitized from so much stimulation and so much pressure for getting results with your creation. So this is why you can feel mentally numb when ideas don't spark the joy that they used to. On top of that, you're going to start craving bigger results just to feel that same level of satisfaction. Maybe your goal was to get 1,000 followers. And over time, your brain will get desensitized to that and it doesn't give you that same feeling anymore. So it's like, oh, well, I need 5,000, I need 10,000, I need 100,000, I need 1,000,000. Like it just keeps being pushed higher because we are craving the bigger result, even though it's giving the same level of satisfaction. And that only drains your creative energy more. So now we're going to talk about the right hemisphere of the brain, which is your creative side. Creativity is distributed throughout the brain, but your right hemisphere tends to govern intuition, emotion, metaphors, and holistic thinking. So I bet you can realize how much of a right brain person I am. Okay, so your left hemisphere is focused on logic and structure and language. In burnout, we kind of become trapped in that left brain dominance where we are overanalyzing and overplanning and overthinking and overworking. And so the right brain, where we focus on play and curiosity and intuition, goes quiet. So creative burnout isn't the death of creativity. It starts to become an imbalance between your logic and your intuition. So the other piece I want to talk about in the brain with creative burnout is divergent thinking. So divergent thinking is the brain's ability to generate many ideas and answers or possibilities from a single starting point. And it's the opposite of what would be called convergent thinking, which is when your brain is always looking for the right answer. So for example, if I say, name all the uses for a paperclip, someone that is a convergent thinker is going to say, oh, it's to hold paper. A divergent thinker might say, oh, it's a lockpick, it's a bookmark, it's a phone reset pin, it's a jewelry hook, right? The goal is not to be right, it's to be expansive. And so that creative energy is truly expanding possibility beyond the obvious feature. So divergent thinking lights up that prefrontal cortex and that default mode network that we talked about with daydreaming. Your brain says, what if we combined this with that? That's why the best ideas always come from when you're relaxed, when you're driving, when you're showering, when you're walking, because your mind has been able to relax into what's called free association mode. And this allows for your mind to drift without the censorship, letting one thought or image or memory just naturally lead to another. So it's that mental state where you stop trying to think creatively and the ideas just simply start appearing. When does that come up for you? Does that come up for you right before you go to sleep or when you wake up in the morning? Or when does that activate for you? For me, it a lot of times happens when I'm podcasting. It happens first thing in the morning. It happens when I'm on a walk. So that's why those things are really powerful for activating your creative flow. And now we know the science behind it. And for many people who are neurodivergent, divergent thinking is very natural. And this would be someone who maybe has ADHD or ADD. But modern work culture punishes that sense of thinking with rigid systems and constant deadlines and having the sensory overload and having to have that forced focus on linear tasks suppresses that natural creative rhythm. So this is why burnout can feel sharper, because they're in a space of having to constantly mask or compress how their brain wants to think, or they're being told that they're too scattered or too much or too deep, messages that shut down that creative trust. All right, well, we covered a lot, but be sure to subscribe and follow because, as you know, we're going to be diving in and talking about manifesting in burnout. So be sure to be on the lookout for those new episodes. Thank yourself so much for showing up today, and thank you for tuning in to the She Sacral podcast.